Hi, I'm Chris Clark, publisher of NACD Directorship magazine, and on today's BoardVision, I'm going to have the pleasure of speaking with Mary Ann Cloyd, leader of PwC's Center for Board Governance. Welcome, Mary Ann.
Hi, Chris. It's a pleasure to be back.
You are one of our vital partners in the 2020 initiative, which is an ongoing program, not just here, but for years to come, that will help directors and management really anticipate the substantive shifts in the role of the director and hopefully the new tools that they'll need to be successful. Our second main topic of that first gathering was, quite frankly, a debate on performance metrics, total shareholder return, total stakeholder return, and it got to a point where it wasn't an either-or situation. What was your take on it?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting question, Chris, because as you and I were doing one of the earlier episodes of this, we talked about that fact about what metrics should boards be looking at as they help in achieving their oversight responsibilities. And I think, and I know that there's been a lot of discussion about it, from all of you at the NACD, the risks that you run if all you focus on is total shareholder return. And I agree with that. And I think that there was a lot of good dialogue at 2020 about what other types of metrics should we be looking at or should a board be looking at. And in our last episode, we talked, one example was on the safety. But, as I've thought about this, one thing that comes to mind to me is that when we talk about boards overseeing risk and we talk about a board member's duty, a director's duty in general, one of the first things we say is you have to understand the business, right? So to really be effective in your job, you need to understand the business. And I think that really ties into this, what metrics should I be considering is, because if the only metric that I focus on is total shareholder return, that would suggest that maybe I'm not delving in enough into some of the business aspects. So, I wouldn't sit here with you and pretend to tell you that I know what that metric should be. But I think what I would do is challenge those out there who are watching our dialogue today to think about what some of them might be. So, we certainly talk about, the GRI initiatives and looking at that whole aspect. Is that too much? I don't know. But I think that whether it's looking at what other stakeholder measurements there might be, and I use stakeholder term broadly with, you've got customers, you've got employees. I mean, do you look at how you're growing the business, how you're bringing in talent? So, again, not to say that I would tell you which one of those metrics you should be looking at, but I really my challenge would be to the directors out there watching to really give that some serious thought.
There was a discussion, which I was listening to intently, really about, again, looking forward about how boards can be more effective in shaping strategy. What struck you that I may not have heard?
Yeah, it's interesting on getting the right information and on strategy, because I don't think I have ever been with a group of directors before, and 2020 was certainly no exception, where the topic did not come up of, as a board member, I want to spend more time on strategy. I mean, as you know, one of the things we do at PwC is every year we do a annual corporate director survey, and I think every year for as long as I remember, when we say, where do you want to spend your time, more time on strategy. But I can tie that back into the getting the right information, because I think some of the same discussion we're having around what information do you want as part of this risk oversight. I would then ask the question about, and what information do you want when you're looking at strategy? And then let's not forget the fact that I think that those two dialogues need to be linked. So when you're talking about risk, you need to be talking about strategy. But if you'd let me share, as we were thinking about it, or as I was thinking about getting together with you to do this, I went back and looked, because one of the other questions we've asked in our annual corporate directors survey is, as a board member, how satisfied are you with certain information that you get? And this was information that we think you need in the context of overseeing strategy. And one was general or specific customer satisfaction research. If you want to understand the business, another one of those metrics. And over 33% of the directors said that either they didn't get the information or they weren't satisfied with the information.
Is it in terms of quality and depth? All of the above.
I think it could be any or all of the above, because I think probably different people may have thought different things as they're responding. Same thing on competitor initiatives and strategy when you're talking about, again, looking more broadly than just what's my total shareholder return. Again, they're almost 28% or just over 28% said that they were either not getting the information or weren't satisfied. So, again, I think it's just continuing to challenge that thinking. If you go back to, one of the other conversations we had, and I think one of the things we talked about was the need for today's directors to have courage and to show leadership. And this is one of those where, I think as a board member, if I'm either not satisfied with the information I'm getting or not getting it, you keep asking till you do.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Thank you for recapping our first 2020 event. On behalf of PwC and Mary Ann Cloyd, I'm Chris Clark, and this is BoardVision.